Welcome to Selectmen's Roundtable. My name is John LeBeau, and with me tonight are my four colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, our chair, Beth Cassavant, Jim Kane, Morris DiPaolo, and John Samia. We've got an awful lot to talk about in a very short period of time, so forgive us if we move quickly. But as many of you know, and for those of you who don't, we want to make sure you know that the Board of Selectmen recently voted to place a $9.5 million operational override ballot vote on the May 4th annual town election ballot. This particular unanimous support of the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, and the finance committee. All members are supportive. Forgive me, I just want to briefly mention that as an appointed public official, there are certain laws about what I may or may not do relative to political campaigns. So as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I can freely take a position, which I've taken, that I am in support, but I have to be very careful about getting involved in the political campaign. So you will not see my name associated with any of the political activity associated with the effort to get this ballot question passed, but I am fully supportive of that. So with that personal note, we're going to talk about the details of the override, an agreement that's been made between the Board of Selectmen and the school committee, and try to address many of the most common questions that we're hearing. So as we get into it, I think we need to start at the beginning. Why is an operational override needed now? And let's get into that. Why do we need an operational override now? I mean, we've talked about deficits and revenues, but I think we need to get into the details. Does someone want to try to take a crack at that?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. So in Shrewsbury, we face a structural deficit. That's something that we've been aware of for a while. A structural deficit happens when recurring expenses increase faster than recurring revenues. We've had several committees over the last several years take a look at this. Back in 2007 and 2013, fiscal study committees were engaged, which comprised elected officials as well as many members from the community at large. And that was an endeavor to take a look at the town's expenses as well as revenue opportunities. And what was concluded is that our town is a very well-run operation with very little opportunities to reduce expenses without affecting services. So in 2014, we had a $5.5 million override that provided a shot in the arm for revenue. And the promise at that time was at least 5 years before additional revenues may need to be looked at from the community, and that lasted 7 years. So why now in 2021? Revenues, the pandemic has significantly impacted revenues. From fiscal year, if you look at 2 fiscal years ago, where we were projected for fiscal year 2022, we're projected to have $3.8 million less of revenues than originally projected. That is directly attributed to local receipts being much lower. Lower meals taxes, lodging receipts, excise taxes, and the town didn't have any margin as it was, combined with funding for our pension. That was believed to be fully funded in fiscal year 22 due to some adjustments with actuarial tables. That was another $1.8 million of revenues that was originally expected to be in fiscal year 22. So fiscal year 22, we were looking at $5.5 million of less revenues than expected just a couple short years ago. So you combine those two and you have a perfect storm. And the impact could be significant, particularly the municipal side and the school side, looking at reduced services, reduced operations. We saw on the school side, it could impact our ability to open Beal, may not be able to do that, a reduction in 50 FTEs, resulting in larger class sizes. And this really, as in 2014, the question is in front of us in 2021, really depending upon, well, what do we want our community to look like? Do we want our community to be able to provide a level of municipal and school services that the residents have come to expect and enjoy? Or do we want to become a different community And that's a question that was pertinent in 2014, and it's also now. So it's really, the pandemic exacerbated the problem, but let's be clear, the structural deficit existed long before that. So that combined this year is why this is the year that we're asking voters, and we all backed the $9.5 million override request because of so many of these factors that we're facing now that could really impact the long-term vibrancy of our community.
Well, thank you, John. As I will continue to mention, we've got to keep pace. Certainly, we've heard a lot about the Beal School, the new Beal School, and we funded this construction, but now there's questions about its staffing and operations. So could we quickly, in just like a minute or two, address the question of building the Beal School and the operational issues associated with it that we're facing now? Anyone?
John?
Yes, Jim.
John, I'll take a shot on that one, considering I was the chair of the building committee up until a few weeks ago. I think it's a relatively straightforward answer. The building was overwhelmingly approved by town meeting as well as by the voters. And we rolled into this past year with sufficient funds within the plan. And if you look at the loss of Schedule A receipts, those local receipts, that was the money that operated was the money, the money that evaporated was the money to operate the school. It's actually quite a linear situation in my mind that those dollars evaporated as the result of the shutdown of the economy.
Could we talk a little bit about financial planning and the whole framework around the override? The long-term budget planning, and particularly the agreement that the Board of Selectmen and the school committee arrived at. What kind of promise, what kind of guarantee does that give the voters and the taxpayers? Moa, Beth?
Oh, okay, Mo, you throwing it my way? Very good. Be happy to speak to that a little bit. I think what makes this override very different from what the voters experienced in 2014 is this agreement, this framework between the Board of Selectmen and the school committee that we worked on for a good long time to make sure that it was going to meet the long-term needs of both the school department and the municipal departments. This agreement can be found on the town website. There is an entire page that is dedicated to documents related to the override and the many meetings that we had going through the different details and scenarios. What this actually does is have the two groups commit to a % of funding increase year over year. So the school department has committed to not increasing any of their expenses above 4.25%, and municipal expenses will not increase more than 3.5%. And within that framework, we know from the detailed budgeting and forecasting that was done by the town manager and also by Dr. Sawyer and Mr. Collins on the school side, that is going to be enough to maintain services and in some cases enhance the services that are able to be provided. So when we go forth with this question, we have a guarantee for the residents that we aren't coming back for at least 4 years. We will be addressing the structural deficit that we've struggled with for many years to come. And if this passes, our budget cycles going forward will not always entail all the hand-wringing because we already know that we're going to have the revenue in place that we need. The other piece that makes this work is what's called an override stabilization fund. And again, this would need to be approved and established by town meeting in May, but that would take $3 million. So the override funding breaks down to $5 million for schools, $1 million for municipal, and then $3 million that's going to go into this override stabilization fund. And that's what gives it the longevity that year after year, we're able to draw down on that fund to make sure that we're able to maintain the level of staffing and services within each department.
And John, if I might add, we also addressed the issue of one-time monies or unanticipated funds that would be reoccurring. so that neither we won't be spending that money as if nothing happened. Reoccurring money is only going to be spent for one-time expenses. In other words, maybe for capital projects or an investment in the schools that won't have to happen again the following year. And reoccurring funds are limited to a percentage, which escapes me at the moment. But a good balance of that extra revenue that'll come in, if it does, will go into the stabilization fund. And the idea is to keep the override stabilization fund as funded as well as we can to hopefully extend the duration of this commitment and go beyond 4 years if it's possible. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I was going to talk about the American Rescue Plan funds, but I'll wait till you bring that one up.
Thanks. But one thing, I mean, we're moving along pretty well, but could we talk just for a minute or so on what we've done to really try to mitigate the situation before we went to ask for an override? So what did we do to both try to increase revenue and control costs? I think we're aware of them, but I think it's important that the voters are aware of some of the steps that are always being taken, actually, but certainly were taken now with a little greater need. So, I mean, certainly our economic development has not stopped. Everyone has seen in the past few years, whether it's Lakeway Commons, the new work that's happening down at the Edgemere Drive-In, work over in the Worcester Sand and Gravel area that we think is onward. Also, always working on grant opportunities, shared services, regionalization, and just sharpening the pencil and taking a look at the budgets. But now, Mo, if you'd like, I guess I covered that one, or at least for the moment I did. Since you mentioned the American Rescue Plan, that's another thing we're hearing. I mean, the Biden administration and Congress just approved a tremendous, huge, multi-trillion-dollar assistance package, and a lot of money's coming to the cities and towns. So people ask, why doesn't that just solve the problem?
Well, the simple answer is it's basically one-time money. That's the first and the most simple answer. The second one is, the second part to that is, we know generally the buckets that the money is going to go into, but we do not know what the requirements are going to be. Some of that money is going to be spent over 2 years or are going to be allocated over 2 years. We don't know how that's going to be split up. And finally, I think one of the most important things is we don't know when that money is coming. Supposedly, we're going to find out in June what the guidelines are going to be and when they'll be releasing money. But, that's still a few months away. And we can't run the government on revenues that we don't have. Right now, they're just estimates. They've fluctuated a little bit. And we just don't know yet. But the other thing is with one-time funds like these stimulus funds are, whether they're directed funds into certain buckets or not, is that if we use those funds this year to supplement the budget and we don't have those funds next year, we create a bigger cliff. So there's an issue, and we've been warned or been advised by the state not to plan these for these monies to be used for operating revenues on a recurring basis because they aren't going to be recurring funds. But one of the things that we've done with what we're committing to on the rescue funds is if they do come in and they can be used in some fashion for some of the operational needs that we have, if the override were to pass at 9.5 million, and say we had $1.5 million that we could use this year, or this coming year, then we would, instead of levying the full 9.5 million, we would use that 1.5 million that's available from the federal government to supplement the budget and still have a revenue of 9.5 million, but only the taxpayers would only see a tax increase based on $8 million as an example, as opposed to 9.5. So there are plans to use that money judiciously and to try to hold down the tax rate to the extent that we can. But even at this date, the middle of April, we still do not have a firm handle on what the conditions are going to be or when the money's going to come out.
Well, thanks, Mo. I think we should talk about, what's the result of a yes vote? What's the result of a no vote? So let's talk about the benefits of a yes vote. And let's break it down a little bit. Municipal, John, I'm going to ask you in a minute to talk about school operations as a former school committee member. But does somebody else want to talk about what the benefits to a yes vote would be relative to the municipal operation? Don't be shy.
Happy to jump in. Happy to jump in
Go
there.
right ahead.
So there are many benefits to a yes vote on the municipal side. Granted, it isn't the same amount of money that would be going to the school department, but it's also just a different way that dollars stretch in a municipal budget differently than they do in a school budget. We're able to take that $1 million on the municipal side and really leverage it to do things that we just don't get to otherwise. I think it's really important to note that in the current budget without an override, there's no increase to service or staffing levels on the municipal side unless they're related directly to the opening of the Beal School. So we'll actually have some opportunities here to do things like hire an economic development coordinator, someone whose sole responsibility is attracting and retaining businesses here in Shrewsbury. And we all know that when we increase that commercial tax base, that is a benefit to everyone in the town because it lessens the burden on the residential tax base. We've been wanting to have an outreach coordinator full-time for the senior center. That is something that is needed, especially we see this now with the amount of work that the senior center staff is doing outreach-wise, getting people situated with COVID vaccines and answering questions during this whole pandemic period. We're looking to add social workers to the police department, not just one. A community of our size requires more than one social worker to be working with the police department. There's also a safer grant opportunity, and that would be a way to get 4 more firefighters as a shared cost, right? Because part of that money would be grant funded for a certain number of years, and then the town would then need to take over those salaries. That's how we have 4 additional firefighters currently, is through a safer grant. But without knowing that we have this additional funding, we can't commit to the cost associated with 4 additional firefighters because there's no way to fund them once the grant funding runs out. And the other piece that is very exciting to me is the opportunity to do a townwide strategic plan with some community engagement to actually get out there and talk to residents about what it is they want from their local government. I think that we're pretty good at providing services and understanding what the community values, but unless you ask, sometimes you really don't know. And if I could just for one more moment speak about the importance of this to the municipal and actually the town-wide situation is we enjoy a AAA bond rating. And if our, without this override, that could be something that's in jeopardy. And a AAA bond rating is very similar to someone's credit score. You know, when you go to get a mortgage on a home, if you have a good credit score, you get a better interest rate. Well, we have a AAA bond rating, so we get a better interest rate when we go to borrow for something like the police station. And the manager said at our last meeting that we are able to refinance the bonds associated with Sherwood at our current bond rating of AAA, and that saves $1.6 million on the life of that commitment that we have to pay back the loan. So there's a lot of benefit to be had here in many different ways.
Well, thank you, Beth. We're going to move right to John now. John, can you try to briefly but completely talk about how the benefits of a yes vote would affect the school operation?
Sure. So with the school department, 80% of their budgets were tied to personnel. So in the case with the $5 million that will be allocated to the schools, as you'd expect, a lot of that would go to personnel. But if it were not to pass, what it really would result in larger class sizes, much larger class sizes. I was just jotting down notes from grade 1 all the way through grade 8, where class sizes would go down from school committee guidelines to the low 20s, all the way up to 5th, 7th, and 8th grade, 28 to 30 students in a classroom. Those are really pre-2014 numbers, and particularly the impact with larger class sizes, with so many different levels of learners going back into the schools after being hybrid this past year and remote last year. I think they need more supports, and this would actually be less. At the high school level, 12 teachers that you're looking at, if the override were not to pass, as opposed to if it passed, that mean larger class sizes there, allied arts reductions. So what this would buy actually are fewer kids in a classroom, better learning opportunities, a slow restoration, but not much, of the last year in fiscal 21, 1.9 million was cut from the school budget, resulting in almost 30 FTEs. A possible flow, a small piece of that could be restored. And the ability to really meet the school committee's strategic priorities. So what it would buy, in a nutshell, is class sizes as of today, and it would not increase the class sizes to levels I think that the community has overwhelmingly said in the past is not acceptable. So it would keep an education program now, and hopefully over the next 4 years, together with this commitment, provide for small restorative opportunities, but also would allow the district to move forward with some strategic investments to provide a level of education that we've heard a lot through emails to us that the community expects. And the one other thing, actually, if I did say it, I apologize for redundancy. They're also looking to, this will keep the media centers open. That is also what would be part of the override, to be able to whittle down the budget and meet what the town manager has allocated. One of the casualties of that would mean that media centers would be closed. So an asset that all of us probably experienced, and it's very rich in curriculum opportunities for these kids, would be a casualty of this. So I view it as a real opportunity for the community to step up and just back up what we all expect from our schools.
And John, if I might
So
add.
thanks, John.
John?
You got to go fast, Mo.
Okay. It allows us also specifically to open up the Beal School as intended. And if people remember, the part of the reason we wanted the Beal School to be built and opened is because we're going to offer, the plan was to offer full-day kindergarten, which is not going to be possible if we don't have this override.
Exactly. So, a benefit of the yes vote is certainty for a period of 4 years. There's a pledge being made. I want to remind the voters, in a much less formal fashion, the Board of Selectmen made a similar promise in 2014 that we wouldn't come back for 5 years. Well, we didn't come back for 5 years. Actually, we're coming back now 7 years later. Here we have a much more rigorous approach, kind of a change of how we approach the budget with these caps, and folks can have certainty that town won't be looking for another override for a minimum of 4 years. As we've heard, the implications of a no vote impacts the ability to open deal as planned, impacts the bond rating, which every one of us pays higher or lesser in our taxes, interest charges based on our bond rating, and a level of service. We're not crying wolf. There will be a noticeable decline in the levels of services provided by municipal and school departments. We've got about 3 to 4 minutes left, so we should move into some final thoughts. Certainly, there's a variety of ways folks can vote. They can vote by mail. They're going to be able to early vote. Certainly, in-person voting can take place. We should also mention, some folks say, well, do you have to have the election on May the 4th? Well, we made a decision. I mean, in the COVID world, even though we're all starting to get vaccinations, we honestly didn't think having a separate election for this purpose was that great an idea. And it would still have to happen relatively, it would have to happen before the end of the FISC gaining that much time. So we thought it was important to bundle it with the municipal election and get all that work done at the same time for a variety. Final thoughts.
I have one final thought for people. If you are planning to vote by mail, you can go to the town clerk's website to download the application. And then you can either mail that back to the town clerk, you can scan it and email it to the town clerk, or you can drop it in the bills box outside of town hall. But you don't want to delay because you need to allow time for your ballot to get to you and for you to be able to return it, and you want your vote to count.
One quick thought that I have is that this is the opportunity. At the local level, you have the biggest impact to determine how you want to live on a daily basis. And this is an important vote for you to determine what you want our community to be. Come out on May 4th, and hopefully that if you need more information, there's a lot on the website or on YouTube with our previous meetings. But we believe that in order to meet what our communities expect and have become accustomed to, that a yes vote is in order. We all support it. Hope that you agree. And if you need any more information, either go online or call any of us.
Jim, any parting words, final words?
John, I think it's been laid out that the board is taking an inclusive view with the various other boards and commissions. And what I think people really need to realize is we're asking that they trust us moving forward. The final decisions on spending and how much of that override might be used won't be made until the tax rate is set in November. So there's ample time for continued participation along the way. A no vote will no doubt change Shrewsbury dramatically. And I don't think at the end of the day, that's something most people find as an attractive option.
So thank you. It's a very important vote on May the 4th. We ask the voters to inform themselves on the issues. As my colleagues have mentioned, there are many ways to do that. And as several of us has said, most of the residents of the town of Shrewsbury will notice a difference, a negative difference, should this vote not pass. So we'd like you to consider that, and consider that when you go to the polls on May 4th or vote prior to in the other means. So thank you so much for joining us for Selectmen's Roundtable. We hope we've provided you some addition, and please make it a point to vote in the May 4th annual town election. Thank you very much. Bye now.